The folder landed on the table like he wanted it to make a sound. Colonel Drayden didn't look up when Sergeant First Class Yael Kovac walked in. He was reading something, or pretending to. That was the thing about men like Drayden. They used silence like a weapon even before the conversation started. Kovac stood at attention. She'd learned not to fill silence. "You want to tell me," Drayden said finally, still not looking up, "why I have a complaint on my desk from 3 members of Bravo Scout platoon saying they refuse to operate under your call sign?" "No, sir." That got him to look up. "No? No, sir. I don't want to tell you that. Because I already know what they said, and I already know why." Drayden leaned back. He had one of those faces that had been weathered into something that looked like authority. Deep lines, flat eyes, jaw like a piece of old equipment. He'd done 2 tours in Kandahar and 3 in Iraq, and he wore that history the way some men wear a uniform. Like, it was the only thing that proved they existed. "They said you're reckless," he said. "They said you make calls that put the team at unnecessary risk." Kovac said nothing. "They said," Drayden continued, and here he picked up the folder again, opening it to a specific page as though he'd flagged it in advance, "that you have a habit of acting alone, of not communicating your positions, of making tactical decisions above your authority. With respect, sir, those decisions kept 4 of them alive in Sector 9 last November." The silence that followed was a different kind than the first one. Drayden set the folder down. "You've got a mouth on you, Kovac. I've been told that, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look without blinking, which she knew irritated men like him, and she did it anyway. "You're being transferred," he said. "Reconnaissance Support Unit, Fort Pickett. Effective next week." She didn't flinch. She'd expected something like this. That didn't make it land any softer. "Dismissed." She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. Nothing dramatic, just a mechanism doing what mechanisms do. The hallway was empty. The linoleum floor was the particular color of military budget decisions, a beige that had given up on itself. Kovac stood there for a moment, hands still near the door handle, not because she wanted to go back in, but because she needed a second to let something settle. Reckless. She turned that word over in her mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath it. She'd grown up in Lethbridge, Alberta, not on a base. Her father had been a corrections officer, her mother a dental hygienist. There was nothing in her childhood that explained what she'd become, which was, depending on who you asked, either one of the finest long-range markswomen the Canadian Attached Exchange Program had ever seen, or a problem the system didn't know what to do with. She had joined the Canadian Forces at 19, transferred through the exchange program to U.S. Army infrastructure at 23, and by 27 had a marksmanship record in the 75th Ranger Support Trials that the evaluators had argued about for 45 minutes before formally entering it into the log. Not because they doubted it, because they'd had to recheck it twice. It was Sergeant Major Adebayo who'd told her about the results. He'd found her in the equipment bay, running maintenance on her rifle with the focused, habitual calm of someone who did this the way other people made tea. "You know what you scored?" he'd said. "I know what I scored. You want to say the number out loud?" She'd glanced up at him. Adebayo was a big man, broad shoulders, reading glasses that he refused to admit were necessary. He had a way of standing that suggested he'd been standing somewhere important for a long time. "Not particularly," she said. He'd laughed, a real one. "No, you wouldn't." That was 2 years before Drayden's folder. 2 years before the transfer. Fort Pickett sat in Virginia's central belt, like something the landscape had been persuaded to accommodate rather than something it had chosen. The base had a particular smell in July, cut grass and hot asphalt, and something chemical underneath it. You stopped noticing after a week. Kovac stopped noticing it after 4 days. Reconnaissance Support Unit was not where careers went to grow. She understood that on arrival. The unit ran intelligence-gathering operations in support of larger SOF missions. Important work, genuinely important, but positioned at the edge of the operational conversation, the part of the table where people spoke and were not entirely heard. Her immediate superior was Captain Frayne. He was 31, competent, and deeply uncomfortable with her. "Your record," he said, the first morning, looking at his desk rather than at her, "there's a lot here." "Yes, sir." "The incident in Sector 9? "It's in the report, sir." He looked up then. He had the face of someone who'd been trained to project confidence, but who was running that projection slightly above his actual reserves. "I'm sure it is. I'd like to hear it from you." Kovac considered this. 4 of our scouts got pinned in an alley off Hodgen Street. The two senior operators went to extract them through the main route. That route had been compromised. I saw it, they didn't. I took a parallel position 340 meters out and suppressed the secondary threat long enough for all four to clear the zone, alone. Yes, sir. Without radioing your position, I was moving. Radioing would have given me away. Frayne was quiet for a moment. The complaint said, I know what the complaint said, sir. He looked at his desk again. Then, you'll be on rotation with Peterson's section, overwatch and intelligence support. I want full radio discipline, position checks every 15 minutes when in the field. Understood. She said it cleanly without editorializing, and he seemed to take that as the end of the conversation. It wasn't the end of anything. Peterson's section had 3 people in it besides Peterson himself. A signal specialist named Ruark, who was 22 and from Thunder Bay and who seemed to find everything mildly funny. A medic named Cho who spoke very little and moved with the efficiency of someone who decided that unnecessary motion was a form of waste. And a scout named Vasseur who was the one Kovac had to watch. Vasseur was 34. He'd been in for 11 years. He had the particular kind of confidence that comes from having been the best person in most rooms for most of a decade, and he had not yet encountered the specific kind of recalibration that comes from being in a room with someone better. The first week, he was polite, professionally distant. Kovac had seen that before and knew what it meant. He was assessing her, and he hadn't decided yet whether she was a threat or a curiosity. The second week, he decided. They were running a field exercise, simulated overwatch of a vehicle convoy through a wooded corridor. And Kovac had taken her position on a ridgeline 200 meters further than the designated point, because the designated point had a partial sight line that would have given her coverage of roughly 60% of the corridor. From the ridgeline, she had 94. Vasseur called it in, said she was out of position. Peterson radioed her. Kovac, you're 200 out from your mark. Yes, sir. Current mark gives me 60% coverage. I have 94 from this position. The mark was designated for a reason. With respect, sir, the reason was the map. The map doesn't show the tree line shift at the northwest corner. I'm looking at it right now. There was a pause. Hold position, Peterson said. Later, reviewing the exercise footage, the evaluating officer noted that Kovac's position had been the only one with full visual coverage of the corridor's critical section. He noted it in a single line in the passive voice, as though the observation was too obvious to require emphasis. Vasseur didn't say anything to her that evening. But in the mess hall, he moved his tray to a different table. She noticed. She didn't say anything either. The mission came in on a Thursday in late September. It was a reconnaissance tasking. Gather and confirm intelligence on a suspected insurgent logistics network operating out of a series of buildings on the southern edge of a small town in northern Iraq, near the Syrian border. The buildings were civilian adjacent. That was the complication. That was always the complication. The broader operation was being coordinated by a U.S. Special Operations Task Force. RSU's role was overwatch and intelligence relay, get eyes on, confirm or deny the activity, call it in and extract. Clean. Simple. The kind of mission that looks simple on paper because the people writing the paper are not the people going. The team was Peterson, Kovac, Vasseur, Ruark, and Cho, plus 2 additional attachments from the task force. Operators named Gunnell and Bryce, who arrived the morning of the briefing with the quiet, calibrated manner of men who'd done this kind of thing enough times that preparation had become indistinguishable from routine. Gunnell was the senior attachment. He'd been a warrant officer for 6 years. He sat across the table from Kovac at the briefing, and she was aware that he was watching her, the way people watch something they haven't categorized yet. The briefing was thorough. The intelligence was good but not complete. There was a specific building, a converted warehouse structure on the eastern edge of the compound cluster that had irregular thermal readings, but no confirmed visual on occupants or materiel. That building was the question mark. The mission was to answer it. Overwatch position is here, Peterson said, pointing to a point on the satellite image, a slight rise 300 meters northwest of the compound cluster. Kovac, your primary eyes on the warehouse. Vasseur, you've got the northern approach. Ruark, you're relaying. Cho, you're with me at the secondary position. What's the egress if we're compromised? Gunnell asked. Peterson walked through it. 2 routes, primary and secondary, both leading to a vehicle extraction point 1,200 meters east. Kovac was looking at the satellite image. What's the date on this image? She asked. Peterson checked. 6 days. She studied the image, The eastern edge of the warehouse had a shadow anomaly that might have been a vehicle, might have been construction material, might have been nothing. 6 days was a long time for a logistics operation to reconfigure. Something? Peterson asked. Possibly. She traced the shadow with her finger. There's something at the east wall that wasn't there in the earlier image from the intelligence packet. Could be equipment movement. Could be they've changed the access point. Peterson and Gunnell both looked. We'll verify on approach, Peterson said. It was the right call. You don't redesign a mission based on a satellite shadow. But she filed it away. They inserted at 0215. The air had the particular cold of high desert nights, thin and sharp, like the dark had its own edge. They moved in 2 groups, Kovac and Vasseur taking the overwatch line, the others moving to the secondary position. Communication was clean. Everything was clean. The compound cluster was quiet. One light on in the main structure, a window on the second floor, amber behind a curtain. The warehouse was dark. Kovac settled into her position. She'd chosen a spot 12 meters to the left of the designated mark, behind a rock formation that gave her better concealment without compromising the sight line. She noted it in the radio check, and Peterson acknowledged without comment. For 40 minutes, nothing moved. Ruark was relaying regular checks. Cho had confirmed no thermal anomalies at the secondary position. Vasseur was running the northern approach scan. She could hear his quiet, methodical position reports. Whatever he thought of her, he was a professional in the field. She gave him that. At 0312, the warehouse door opened. She was on it before the report was out of her mouth. Movement, east face, warehouse, single figure, holding at the threshold. Peterson, copy visual, partial, male, medium build, dark jacket. Holding something, can't confirm. He's looking east. A pause. He's waiting for something. 40 seconds. A vehicle came up the eastern track, no lights. Moving slow, she tracked it. Vehicle eastern approach, no lights. 2 occupants visible, possibly more. Copy. This isn't a routine logistics run, she said. It wasn't a radio discipline approved observation, but it was a true one, and Peterson had the good sense to understand the difference. They're being careful about being seen. The vehicle stopped at the east wall, exactly where the shadow anomaly had been in the satellite image. She heard Gunnell's voice on the channel. Confirm that location? Confirmed. East wall. The vehicle access point has shifted from the intelligence packet. The main entry on the north face isn't their primary anymore. A pause, longer than she'd have liked. Then, Kovac, can you get eyes on the vehicle cargo without exposing your position? She assessed the geometry. There was a line, narrow, through a gap in the rock, that gave her a partial on the vehicle's rear. It required moving 20 meters to her right, which put her on lower ground but kept the rock formation between her and the compound. Possible, requires position change. I'd be moving blind for approximately 8 seconds. Your call, Gunnell said. She looked at Vasseur. He was 50 meters to her right, facing north. She keyed the radio. Vasseur, I'm moving right. 8 seconds. Can you pick up my sight line? A pause that was half a second longer than it needed to be. Then, copy. I've got it. She moved. The 8 seconds were the kind of 8 seconds that don't feel like 8 seconds. The ground was uneven, and she'd mapped it on approach, but mapping and moving are different things, especially in the dark, especially when the people 60 meters away must not hear you. She moved on the balls of her feet, weapon up, breathing through her nose. She found the gap, pressed into it, got her eye to the scope. The vehicle's rear was open. 2 men were unloading. She couldn't see what they were carrying. The angle was wrong, but their movement had the particular urgency of people who've done a thing many times and want to be done with it quickly. And then the third man stepped into her sight line. She recognized what she was seeing before she could articulate what it was. The particular body language of someone whose presence changed the weight of a scene. He wasn't carrying anything. He was watching. He had a phone to his ear. She radioed it. What came next happened in the space between 2 breaths. The compound light went out. Vasseur's voice. Contact north. 2 no, 3 figures. They were on the perimeter. They've been watching us. The mission had been burned. She didn't know how, didn't know when, but they were made. Peterson. All elements, we are compromised. Execute extraction, primary route. She was already moving. Back up the slope. Vasseur converging from the north. Both of them fast but controlled, not running. Because running is noise, and noise is decision-making for the other side. She could hear Ruark's breathing on the channel, steadier than it should have been for someone who was 22 and had just found out they were made. They reached the primary egress point at 0339. The route was blocked. She saw it before Peterson called it. Two vehicles, static, lights off, positioned across the track where the land narrowed between two ridge lines. They'd been placed there, not parked, placed. Someone had put them there and gone somewhere else to wait. Primary is closed, she said. I see it. Peterson's voice had the quality of calm that comes from training suppressing everything else. Secondary route, we move. The secondary route added 1,400 meters and took them through a dry riverbed that the intelligence packet had marked as low risk. Kovac had noted, during the briefing, that the packet's assessment of the riverbed was based on the same 6-day-old imagery as everything else. She had not said this out loud because it had seemed, at the time, like the kind of observation that would be received as obstructionism. She said it now. The riverbed assessment is 6 days old. We don't have another option, Peterson said. She didn't argue. He was right that they didn't. She just needed him to know what they were running into. The riverbed was dry, which the packet had correctly assessed. It was also occupied. Not many, 3 men from what she could see, positioned at the bend where the bed curved northeast. They hadn't been there 6 days ago. They were there now. She saw them at 110 meters. She stopped moving and raised a fist, and behind her she felt the team stop. She keyed the channel to Peterson only. Subvocal. 3 contacts at the bend. 110 meters. They're on the inside of the curve. They'd be oriented toward the direction we came from. Meaning, they were positioned to stop people moving through the riverbed toward the extraction point. Meaning, they'd anticipated the secondary route. Meaning, this was not improvised. Peterson's. She looked at the terrain. The eastern bank rose steeply, too steep for a team to move quietly. The western bank was shallower but exposed. Directly ahead, the bend itself created a dead ground, a zone that the 3 contacts couldn't see from their position. Dead ground at the bend, she said. If we can get 3 personnel into it before they shift position, we can neutralize from close range without exposure. The rest hold here. Who? She didn't hesitate. Gunnell, Vasseur, and me. A pause. Then Gunnell's voice quiet. Walk me through it. She did. 45 seconds. He asked 2 questions. She answered them. Vasseur? Gunnell said. The pause was shorter this time. Solid, Vasseur said. They moved on a count of 3. What she remembered afterward was not the movement itself, but the sounds, the particular scrape of boot on stone, the shallow wind in the riverbed, the distance between her own heartbeats. The dead ground was exactly where she'd calculated it to be. They reached it without triggering anything. What followed was fast and close, and not something she thought about in terms of sequence afterward, because in those moments sequence is a retrospective construction, and the thing itself is just a continuous present. 3 contacts, close range, 12 seconds, then quiet. Peterson brought the rest of the team through. Cho checked Gunnell's arm where he'd taken an impact, not around a fall, but the kind of fall that leaves something behind. Ruark was already relaying to the extraction coordination. At 0427, they reached the extraction point. The vehicle was there. The driver, a taciturn man named Breck who'd been driving extraction for 8 years, looked at all of them with the specific expressionlessness of someone who'd seen people arrive from worse. Nobody spoke much on the drive out. Ruark eventually fell asleep against the window. Cho worked on Gunnell's arm. Vasseur sat across from Kovac in the vehicle's dark interior and looked at her for a long moment. The dead ground, he said. Yes, you saw that from 110 meters. In the dark. She didn't answer. The road moved under them. I had a partial, she said finally. The geometry was readable. Vasseur nodded slowly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't quite anything yet. But it was different from the silence in the mess hall. Different from the tray moved to the other table. It had weight in a different direction. The debrief was 3 hours. Peterson ran it, with Gunnell present and a task force intelligence officer who asked very specific questions about the third man she'd observed, the one on the phone, watching the unloading, and who wrote down her answers with the careful attention of someone who understood that what she'd seen was the thing they'd most needed to see. The secondary access point on the warehouse eastern wall, the shift in the logistics pattern, the phone call, the pre-positioned vehicles on the primary egress, the picture she'd assembled from Overwatch, the picture she'd started assembling from a satellite shadow 6 days old, was the piece that made the larger intelligence picture coherent. After the debrief, she walked out into the corridor and stood there, not because she needed to, she just needed a minute before the next thing. Gunnell was behind her. Kovac. She turned. He was a careful man, You could see that in the economy of how he moved, how he spoke. He didn't waste gestures. The task force coordinator wants the Overwatch report attributed correctly. It's in the log, sir. It is. He paused. I've also put in a written addendum to the personnel record. She looked at him. Sector 9 wasn't in your record the way it should have been, he said. I read your file this morning, before the mission. What's in there and what happened in that riverbed tonight, those aren't the records of someone who's reckless. He said the word like he'd read it somewhere and found it insufficient. They're the records of someone who sees things before other people do and acts on it. That's not the same thing. Kovac said nothing for a moment. The hallway was empty. The linoleum was a different color here, gray, but it had the same exhausted quality as all institutional floors. The transfer, she said. I can't undo that. But the addendum goes with you, she nodded once. Clean. He turned to go, then stopped. One more thing. Vasseur asked me this morning if he could be on your section at the next rotation. She didn't quite smile. Close to it. Tell him to put it in writing, she said. Gunnell walked away. She heard his footsteps on the gray linoleum, and then the sound of a door, and then nothing. She stood there for another moment. Outside, through a narrow window at the end of the hall, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the particular gray-blue of a morning that hasn't decided yet what kind of day it wants to be. She watched it for a while. Then she picked up her kit bag and walked toward it.